I still remember the moment I pushed myself away from the kitchen chair, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The plane tickets glowed on my laptop screen, casting a pale blue light across my face in the quiet kitchen. A round trip to San Diego, 2 passengers, me and my 8-year-old son, Liam Harris. One click of the mouse echoed in my head like a declaration. It's over, Megan. 3 years of living in the shadows end today. 3 years ago, my husband Andrew Harris was declared dead in a bizarre accident during a business trip. There was no body, just a hastily written report and a death certificate handed to me with practiced sympathy. I still remember that day like a scar I can't erase, standing in this very kitchen, holding Liam while a trembling colleague said, "He's gone." "I'm so sorry." I collapsed on the floor, feeling the world split open and swallow us whole. From that day on, I lived like a ghost. I had once loved Andrew so much I endured his endless work trips, his late-night calls, and the growing coldness in his voice. I told myself he was just busy, that he would change. But instead, he disappeared, suddenly, permanently. Or at least that's what I thought. Since that day, I swore to live for Liam. I sold my wedding ring to pay part of our mortgage, took a full-time job at a local bank, and refused to let myself rest. Every spare minute was spent trying to fill the emptiness I saw in my son's eyes. Liam didn't ask about his dad much, but every time he did, it was like a blade twisting inside me. Today, when I bought those tickets to San Diego, I wasn't just buying a vacation. I was buying a promise to myself to move forward, to smile again, to teach my son that life isn't only about loss. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled. Liam ran in from the living room with a wide grin the moment he heard, "We're going to the beach." He wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "You're going to be happier there, right, Mom?" I didn't know how to answer. Maybe yes, maybe no. But I knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of something new for us. There was a time when my life felt like something out of a glossy magazine spread. Andrew Harris wasn't just handsome. He had that effortless charm that made people lean in when he spoke, and that quick wit that made me laugh even on the worst days. I met him when I was 25, a junior loan officer at the bank, still figuring out who I was. He walked in with that confident stride, looking like he owned the room, asking questions about mortgage packages as if he already knew all the answers. By the end of that meeting, I was smitten, and he knew it. We married a year later. At first, it was the kind of marriage people envy. Weekend hikes in the Rockies, wine nights under the stars, spontaneous road trips just because we could. Andrew had recently moved into financial brokerage and quickly became one of the rising stars in his firm. I felt proud standing next to him at office parties, his arm draped over my shoulder like we were building something unshakable. And then Liam came along, my sweet boy, our miracle. I thought Andrew would settle down, trade late-night work calls for bedtime stories, choose family dinners over client dinners. Instead, it went the other way. He became even busier, traveling to meet investors and close deals in places I'd never even heard of. There were months when Liam barely saw his dad, except in passing, Andrew, kissing his forehead at 6 in the morning and me pretending not to hear the front door close at midnight. I tried to talk to him about it, at first gently, then desperately. "Andrew, you're missing his childhood," I said one night, standing in the kitchen with tears I refused to let fall. He wrapped an arm around me, kissed my hair, and promised it was just for a season, that all his long hours were to build us a secure future. I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did believe him, until the day he simply didn't come home. At first, I thought it was just another trip he'd forgotten to mention. Then his phone went straight to voicemail. For 3 days, I told Liam, "Daddy's busy, honey. He'll be home soon," even as dread curled in my stomach like a fist. On the 4th day, the call came. An accident. A snowmobile going through thin ice on a remote river in Idaho. Swept away by a current so strong they said divers couldn't recover a body. I remember holding that phone, hearing the words, and feeling my knees give out. My little boy looked up at me with those wide brown eyes, confused as I sat on the kitchen floor clutching the phone to my chest. I thought about all the missed birthdays, the silent dinners, the lonely nights, and hated myself for still loving him even then. They issued a death certificate a week later, a neatly printed piece of paper, legally binding, sealing my life into a chapter I hadn't agreed to end. I buried an empty urn because there was no body to bury, no closure, just silence. And in that silence, I built walls around my heart so high that even Liam noticed. "Mommy, why don't you smile anymore?" he asked one night. I smiled anyway, because what else could I do? For 3 years, I convinced myself I was healing, that I was strong. But grief has a way of sticking like glue. You can scrub and scrape, but it clings to your soul. That's why this trip to San Diego wasn't just about beaches and sunshine. It was about breathing again, even if just for a week. I had no idea how quickly those walls I'd built were about to crack. 3 years had a way of changing everything and nothing at all. I learned to wake up without expecting Andrew's voice in the kitchen. I learned to pay bills, fix leaky faucets, and show up at every one of Liam's soccer games without anyone else in the stands for us. I became the woman who smiled politely when people offered condolences, who waved off concerned questions from coworkers, who convinced herself she was fine even when I wasn't. Denver became quieter in those 3 years. Our friends slowly stopped calling, not out of cruelty, just because life moves on. Mine felt frozen, like winter refusing to thaw. I poured myself into work at the bank, built a routine that left little room for feelings, and clung to Liam like a lifeline. He became my reason for everything. If I felt too tired to get out of bed, I reminded myself, he needs breakfast. He needs school. He needs you to be strong. Liam grew fast, too fast. One day I was teaching him how to tie his shoes, and the next he was telling me which superhero movies I just had to see. And lately the questions about his dad had started again. Quiet ones whispered at bedtime when he thought I couldn't hear the sadness under his voice. "Mom, do you think Daddy can see me?" Or, "When I grow up, will I remember what he looked like?" I answered the best I could, but every answer felt like I was erasing Andrew, replacing him with vague memories and half-truths about a man who worked a lot but loved him very much. The truth was, I hadn't processed any of it. I'd put my grief on a shelf like an old book I didn't want to open. But there are only so many times you can walk past that shelf before the weight starts to crack it. One evening after putting Liam to bed, I found myself scrolling through vacation packages online. I hadn't been anywhere in years, not since before Andrew's death. At first, it felt wrong, like I was betraying something sacred. But then I looked at Liam's closed bedroom door and thought, he deserves happy memories too. That's how I ended up with 2 tickets to San Diego, 1 hotel room near the beach, and a week blocked off on my work calendar. It felt reckless, like jumping into a cold lake but also strangely freeing. This wasn't just about sunshine and ocean views. It was about telling myself I was still allowed to live. When I told Liam, his eyes went wide and his mouth fell open like he'd just been given a superpower. "The beach? For real!" he shouted, bouncing on the couch. He wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe, whispering, "You're going to smile more there, right, Mom?" That simple question lodged in my chest like a pebble you can't swallow. I kissed the top of his head and said, "I'll try, honey. I'll really try." That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights of Denver, thinking about how different my life had become. I used to dream about exotic vacations with Andrew, clinking champagne glasses on some European balcony. Now just booking a simple trip to California felt like climbing Everest. But as I packed Liam's favorite swim trunks and sunscreen, a thought crossed my mind I hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, this is the start of something better. I had no idea then how right and how wrong that thought would be.